Ladies and gentlemen, there is going to be a time on your spiritual journey, on your life journey, when you realize that time is far more important than any kind of money. Now, the title of this video is When Time Becomes More Valuable Than Money. The loquaciousness of this particular phrase comes about from how to use and how to understand the differences between nouns and verbs. So a noun and a verb are very different, right? There was once a sage that said that verbs grow and nouns do not. And I don't actually know if he would consider himself a sage, but it was kind of sagely advice, I guess you could say. And the thing about time is that it's not necessarily a verb, and money is not necessarily a verb, and value isn't necessarily a verb, but when is that an adjective? It's considered an adverb or a conjunction. So when here is the verb. Now, when verbs grow and nouns do not, or as verbs grow and nouns do not, the when part of this phrase is going to be very determined by your own state of mind, your own proclivity to understand life as it is, and also to cast out the superfluous situations that are going on in your own life. Now, you may be one of those kinds of people that are a hoarder of sorts. You may be someone that doesn't like to let go of material things because of the sentimental value that they possess for you. But the thing is that sentimental value only comes from ego investment. So ego investment is primarily a direct correlation between your elusive investments, like the investments that you place in illusions, or the investments that you think you're placing in illusions, compared to, or in contrast with, the investments that you do not make in recognizing factual parts of reality. So the thing about time is that depending on how you can access time, it can be almost like think about it in the movie Interstellar. I don't know if anybody's seen that's watching this video, but in the movie Interstellar, there's a part where one of the characters is able to actually navigate through time as if it were a linear force or a linear place, that you could look at the same room, so to speak, or the same place, but you could travel in time as if it were a linear dimension or a three-dimensional thing. But time doesn't necessarily equate to three dimensions, right? Time, and the weird thing about time in quantum mechanics and all of these other things is that of these other scientific conquests is that time is not necessarily determined by the past, but also the future. So the future can indicate what's going to happen in the present just as much as the present is going to indicate what happened or be an indication of what happened in the past. So time is a very strange phenomenon in the sense that you don't necessarily have a sense of it when you reach this point of knowing when time is more valuable than money. Because you absolutely need money to do things. You absolutely need money to do things in this life. We can't not have money. I know that's a double negative, but but like you cannot not have money in the times that we live in and expect quality to come to you or to be available to you. It's just not going to be the way the world works or the way that any kind of possible generality works in this life. And I know a lot of women out there that are wanting to maintain their independence. Like, let's say you're a woman that isn't necessarily in a relationship right now, or you're in a relationship and yet you still want to have your own income or your own career and such. That's fine. That, do that. But the thing is I noticed that a lot of women want to do this because of one or two things. Either down the road they're scared that or fearful that the man isn't going to be able to provide for them, or they're fearful that if they don't work and the man leaves them, they're not going to have the skills or the tools available to actually get a good job. Now, these are reasonable fears in my estimation. However, the thing that makes these fears also a hindrance to your spiritual growth as a woman is that you are distrusting and you're not trusting your intuition and you're not trusting your choice of who you pick for men. Because ultimately, you women are going to be the selectors, sexually speaking. And men, yes, are the gatekeepers of relationships, but women are the gatekeepers of sex. So men, gatekeepers of relationships, women, gatekeepers of sex. And so it's up to you, women, to choose a man that it's kind of like betting on a horse, right? Like, to some degree, how much investment do you want to place in this man that is going to be able to provide or protect you down the road? Now, because if I told you 5 years from now, this guy, or 6 years from now, 10 years from now, this guy's going to be broke, he's going to be an alcoholic, he is going to be far more addicted to drugs, he's not going to be able to be a good father, etc., you probably wouldn't want him, right? No. No, you wouldn't. And it's likewise for men, where if they found out about a woman that 10 years ago, whatnot, was let's just be real, she was sucking off some other guy's friend or whatnot, and just very vulgar activities and promiscuous activities, that isn't going to fly with a man, because he knows that the time that you invested in those relationships didn't actually matter. Like, there was no real value that you were placing. You were placing money above time. You were placing status or you were placing your emotions above time. Something that I've really noticed about women over the past few months specifically is that they are like absolutely not loyal to anything but their emotions. And I'm not saying this as a negative trait because I do think that that's can be a positive thing, specifically with children and childbearing. However, I also think that depending on how you mold a society, this is going to greatly impact how you value certain things. And so likewise, when men finally reach a point that money is not nearly as important as time, you see, this is something that kind of happened differently with me. I figured out that time was more valuable than money really early on. And I've always known that. I've always known that time was more valuable than money. But now that I'm to the point that I'm at, it's like, okay, now that I know time is more valuable than money, what do I need to do to move forward in the best possible way? Well, I need to make money. Like that's just a must. This is something else that, there's this concept of there's this concept of hoflation, which means men are going to have to work 5 times as hard to get 10 to 20 times worse women now than they did 100 years ago. Now, the reason behind this is because a lot of women that are average do not want average men, which, of course, like, duh. Like, who, if you're an average guy, you don't want an average woman. Like, you want the best of the best. We all want the best of the best. It's natural as human beings. We all want the best of the best. However, and this is something else that I've noticed recently as well in some women, is that they'll say that they want a simple life, and yet their lifestyle does not match that. And it's like, well, what about the women that are really making a lot of money and doing a lot of good things? Like, isn't that attractive? No, not to men, really. And to be honest, like really smart, like if you have a master's degree or a PhD in certain things or whatever, as a man, the first thing that I think about is not how we're going to connect on an intellectual level. It's going to be, okay, how much time and money am I going to have to invest in this woman so she sees and so that she is understanding that I'm still very capable, even though she has these attributes that make who she is. Because oftentimes women that have those kinds of things are very masculine in nature, and it's not very helpful to any kind of relationship as a woman to be very masculine. And to be in the world, you have to be you have to have some kind of masculine energy, right? But the problem is that when you think as a woman that these things are going to attract another man, it's not going to work. It's not going to be that helpful. It's the first thing that some people think about, some other men think about, is how much of a headache it's going to be whenever there's an argument, whenever there's something, because she might want to always be right instead of wanting to cooperate. And I've met women in the workplace, years ago and in other work environments where they acted as if they were better than other people because they had certain degrees. Now, men do this too, of course. Like, don't get it twisted. There are some men that do this, and I think it's just as disgraceful. However, with a woman that like thinking that that's going to attract someone, no, 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 no. The man that has at least a quality mindset, he's not going to perceive you being super wise or super strong or super independent as things that are going to help him in his life. In fact, that might actually deter him altogether, uh, because it would be like dating another man. And no, no man, no man wants to date another man. And this is something I mentioned in a comment to somebody else earlier in another video where I said, yeah, like men don't want to date a poor excuse of a man, and women don't want to date a poor excuse of a woman. So what I mean by that is men don't want to date women that act like men, and women don't want to date men that act like women. It's just not attractive to either. And I saw this podcast recently where the girl was like, "Well, if I make $1 million or whatever, if I'm a millionaire, I would just find a guy to, make my bitch." And the guy on the panel that was doing the interview, that was like running the show, was like, "Well, do you really think that women want that though? Do you think women want a bitch?" And she's like, "Well, no." And he's like, "Well, then why are you advocating for it?" And she just kept going around in circles. And this is just what the modern dating game is like. So, really understanding how time is more valuable than money comes down to knowing where to put your investment. Women, you have to be more careful on what horse you're betting. If the guy is a walking red flag, don't put your money on that horse, man. Like, it's just that simple. And same with the men. If she's a walking red flag, don't bet on that horse. Don't invest your emotions or anything. And this is another thing that I've noticed recently, is that emotional versus physical, I don't want to say cheating per se, but emotional versus physical attraction apart from your significant other. What is the difference? Women will usually cheat when they want someone better. And usually that involves some kind of emotions. Like that's just going to be an emotional investment for her. Again, because women are loyal to their emotions, they're really not loyal to much else. And I'm not saying, again, that's not a bad thing. That's just the way it is. And men are more often than not loyal to, at least they ought to be most loyal to their money. Now, all of this follows God, of course, right? All of this follows God. That's why time is more important than money, is because you notice with time is also God. There's also God with time. That's why we call it Father Time. But apart from God, a man must put his finances and his purpose first, and the woman must be able to put her emotions and before God or after God, must be able to put her emotions and her emotional investments first, so that her emotional investments come from her putting in certain relationships together and keeping them. And if she's not able to keep them, then that's more of a sign on the woman. And in fact, I would actually argue that women not being in relationships for longer periods of time is actually more of a hindrance to the woman than it could ever be for the man. One of the comments said in one of my videos from a long time ago on semen retention, a man said that he realized that celibacy was God's gift to man. That's very true. That's very, very true. However, and celibacy is a gift for women as well. Like I mean, don't get me wrong. I would like to see more sexual purity in the world, but the women that are not in relationships, I'm not saying that there's something wrong with them, but it's, to me, it kind of sets off kind of a wondering of what's going on behind the scenes. Like there could be financial trouble, there could be like family stuff, and with a guy, it's, I guess society can view it as a man being single being kind of like weird or something. But I've also noticed that there's nothing a woman detests more than seeing a man happy and self-fulfilled on his own. Like that's just it's kind of funny sometimes as just as me as a man to watch, but it is what it is. But women, like if they don't have leadership of some kind in their relationships, and I'm not speaking directly about intimate relationships, like whether it's with their mom or with their grandma or with their other friends or whatnot, if they don't have some kind of leadership, they're going to go straight to the ditch, and they're not going to be able to get out unless they have eyes to see and ears to hear. So really understanding the value of time and money is going to help all of your relationships. So when you realize, like when time becomes more valuable than money, you know where to put your energy and your attention. And you also know why you need to put your energy and attention to those certain things. So if you need to be an adult with responsibilities, and you have responsibilities and obligations and things that you need to get done, well, then you have to do those things no matter what. You have to be willing to occupy territory of some kind, whether that territory is of time or in your relationships. If you're not occupying territory, you're drifting. And there's nothing really wrong with drifting per se, but if you're not occupying something, or if you're not creating something, you're going to have a very, very difficult and challenging situation coming up in your life. Because you're not understanding the true value of time, and you're not understanding the true value of money. It took me years to discover the true value of money. I was broke for a little while. Here and there, I've had like spurts of being broke. And it's kept me humble for sure. And I wouldn't necessarily call myself a minimalist, but I do have less material items than most people now. Even though I'm not necessarily broke, like I'm okay. I'm paying my bills. I'm doing what I need to do. And that's the most that I could ask for. And thank God for that. But what I've really understood more is that if you put in the work, the inner work and the external work, you will undoubtedly get better with time. And time is going to be a very big factor in anything and everything that you do. time in your relationships will affect every single aspect of your life. If you don't contribute any time to your relationships to maintain relationships, they will fall apart. And I know that that's sometimes my weakest part of relationships is wanting to maintain the relationship, because a lot of times I don't like the maintenance of relationships, mainly because it's hard to know whether or not the maintenance is worth those relationships. It's hard to know whether or not this is a relationship that I want to maintain. Because if the person is not reciprocating all the time, but sometimes they do, sometimes they don't, it's like, well, we've got 1 foot in, 1 foot out. What are we doing here? What are we doing? And oftentimes, if somebody's got 1 foot in and 1 foot out, I don't even want to be around them, quite frankly. I don't even want to put myself in the position of being in murky water. You know, in the Bible, it also says either be hot or be cold. So if I'm with somebody and there's good energy and, you know, we're both, I was gonna say we're both hot. I mean, yeah, sure. Like if we're both hot, sure, that's great. But if we're both like feeling the situation and we're both putting the investment there, I'm all for it. I will always be there. But if sometimes you're hot, sometimes you're cold, no, no thanks. I'm not about that. Not about that. But if you're just cold to me, if you're just a hater or something, well, at least I know where you stand. Like, at least I know where and what you want to do with your time with me. If you just want to hate me, that's fine. At least I know it. But these people that just waste your time, these snakes that just waste your time, it's just not fucking worth it to some degree to even be near them, right? So I've also understood more and more recently that time is infinity in itself. This is also something that I learned from Interstellar, is when they were going through, like they were in one room specifically, but it was like this catacomb of rooms all together where it was the same room but different time zones in each room. And I realized that stories have a few different components. You must have a place, you must have a coordinate of some kind in that place, and there must be some part in which both characters are going to meet at these coordinates in this time and place. So if you're in building 200 and apartment 1000 at 11 a.m., those are coordinates of the story. Those pinpoint the aspects of the story that are really most important. If you're going to meet another person there, another character in a story. So when you know the place, so in this example, building 200, apartment 1000, or whatever the numbers were, 200 and 1,000. So apartment 1,000, building 200. That building in of itself, that position is timeless. But what happens is not necessarily congruent, right? Or linear, because you could have something happen at 11 a.m. and you could have something happen at 5 p.m., but the thing that happened at 5 p.m. could be contingent upon what happened at 11 a.m. and what happens at 5 p.m. also must be contingent upon what happens at 11 a.m. So the same thing goes with consciousness. Consciousness in its most pure form, in its most pure, authentic, free form, is timelessness. Like, there is just now, right? Like, there is just what's happening in this instant, what's happening all around you. If I look at this highlighter, this is a yellow highlighter. I can feel it in my hand, but it also requires my hand to feel the highlighter. It doesn't require my hand to see the highlighter, but it requires my hand to feel the highlighter. And I can feel the texture of the plastic moving through my fingers, but it also requires my own feeling of my hand to feel the object. So thinking about the object here as the building, if this is the building 200 and here's apartment 1,000, just this building on its own, in its purest form, is timeless. Now, Socrates actually talked a lot about forms, and if I remember correctly, there was like a form of a chair was one of the most predominant examples. So if you drew out a chair, like the most perfect chair, idealistically, it exists, but it doesn't necessarily exist in reality, because there is no perfect thing in reality, because reality is always changing, which is a part of time. I think this is one of the reasons why gods and goddesses were also very, like, the gods and goddesses are immortal in our minds. Truthfully. Like, not just metaphorically, but truthfully. And in Troy, the movie Troy, right, the main character Achilles says that the gods actually envy us as mortals because our time isn't forever. Like, we know that our time on this earth is not forever, and that's what makes it beautiful. Whereas the gods and goddesses, their time on earth is immortalized. They cannot die. And that's what makes mortals so beautiful. The gods and goddesses are jealous and envious of that. That's what he says, right? So, do I agree with this? Yes. I would say that the forms of gods and goddesses do exist in our own minds, and they exist as psychopomps. And a psychopomp is essentially a character of of the mind. You can think about it as like whenever there's a story that somebody's writing. If somebody's writing a story, there is going to be a psychopomp in there. And this is a very psychological term, an old psychological term. But psychopomps, I think, can be very, very helpful because they determine, and you meet them in dreams too, right? Like if you meet figures in your dreams that you don't necessarily know, but they have a really big impact on you, that's a psychopomp. So really understanding, really adhering to the value of understanding the difference between physical reality and timelessness, even though they're really one and the same, even though this highlighter here, see if I can get it now. This highlighter here, its form is timeless, but this highlighter will not last forever. It will eventually be broken down in some way, shape, or form through time. But the time that it exists as a formless object in the mind is eternal. So I hope this video was informative and insightful in some way. This is probably the longest video I've ever done, actually. But I figured, why not? Just go for it and see what's worth putting out there. Because in time, true timelessness, it really confounds me to think about time often. But that's really the most beautiful thing as well, is that timeless quality of life. To live as if we're going to live forever, but knowing that we will die. That's powerful. So, peace be with you. Till next time.